to look at a few things here now. The structure of the neurons, and remember we said a neuron is a nerve, and the signals are sent via electrical impulses. So let's just use the word impulse. Right, so let's try to draw the structure of a sensory neuron. So this is how you'll see it in probably the exam paper. These are sensory receptors. They are connected so let me draw the whole thing out. They split up into little bits like this. Right, okay. So now what you have is you have a covering here of a myelin sheath. So this is like a cover to stop the impulses shorting each other, so they don't. So if the nerves or the neurons touch each other, you won't get the signal to be lost or distorted. So let me just draw that. Then you've got, so what we can do is, so up here, this is where the body of the neuron is, or cell. That's the nucleus. So let me continue drawing these. Okay, so here we have junctions with the receptors. So this is where the signals start. So we'll call this sensory receptor. Right, this cover here is like a cell. It's a cover for the neuron. It's called the myelin sheath. It's like a cover. Right, so the signal now is, let me get that right. So the signal is traveling that way. Right. When the signal is traveling towards the nucleus or the cell body, this part here, so let me just color that in. This bit here is called the dendron. So remember the signal of the impulse is traveling in that direction, it's traveling towards the body of the cell. Now the signal continues on, and now this part, as the signal or the impulse is traveling in that direction, that there is called the axon. So signal traveling to the body is called a dendron, that part. Signal traveling away is called the axon. And then these here are junctions with the, so let's use the word junction. It joins with the central nervous system. So if I can get a color, so this part is the CNS and this is outside the CNS. So just notice that look here, that the cell body is outside the CNS. It's important to know that. So that there is we've just drawn the sensory neuron. Now I'm going to draw the motor neuron. So from here you've got a relay neuron. We're not interested in the structure of that. We just want the motor neuron. So let me put a line down here. This is the CNS, the central nervous system, this part here. And this is outside the body, outside the CNS system. So the cell body for the motor neuron is here. So and this is how they tend to draw it. That's the nucleus. And remember what we said. Let's use a blue. Now, so the impulse is traveling towards the cell body. So these little bits here are called dendrons. And the little pieces that branch off it here are called dendrites. So let's write that down. So the bigger ones are called dendrons and the smaller ones are called dendrites. Right, so now the signal's traveling down here. And when it gets to here, it branches out, and these here are the axon terminations. Axon terminations, that just means that's where they end. And they are linked to, so let me just draw that. So pretend you've got that is your effector, in effect. It's your muscle. And that's what's going to pull your hand back. It's a muscle. Right, let's go back to this. So what's happening is the impulse is now, it's come along the dendrites, along the dendron, past the cell body, and now the impulse is heading off that way. So the impulse is heading off down here. And remember we said anything going away from the cell body, if the impulse is going away from the cell body, it's called an axon. And these are the axon terminations that link onto the effector, in this case the muscle, and that'll pull that back. This part here is in the CNS, in your spinal cord, and the body's inside the spinal cord, but the axon, the rest of it, is outside the central nervous system. So these are the two structures that you need to learn. The sensory neuron, let me get that, and the motor neuron. And it's important that you learn these two structures. Right, there's one more thing we need to do, is the how's the impulse transferred between the neurons. So let's quickly do it. So that's your motor neuron. No, sorry, that is your sensory neuron. It's passed on to the relay neuron, and then that's passed on to the motor neuron. So this is the path. Now we're interested in what happens here. Right. So what you've got is you've got one cell coming here, and it's linked to the next cell. And remember, these neurons are just big cells. So let's just say, for argument's sake, you've got that. So what you have is you have, let's say that's your sensory neuron, and this is your relay neuron. So these are the two. There's a gap. So when an impulse comes here, electrical signal comes here, how does it jump across and then set off another one down here? Well, what happens is there's little chemical neurotransmitters that diffuse across. So this is slightly slower than the electrical impulse. They travel that way, and when they reach here, they set off the actual impulse in the next neuron. So these here, this gap here, right? Okay, let's get this right. This gap here, and you need to learn this word, is called a synapse. Right, so what happens is you have neurotransmitters. Transmitters, okay. They diffuse across the synapse. And then when it gets to the second neuron, it starts another impulse. Done. It's as simple as that. So if I can get hold of a different colored pen, okay, that's the best thing we can do. So the impulse travels down the sensory neuron. It gets here, there's a gap, it's a synapse. Neurotransmitters, which are chemicals, travel across or diffuse across the gap. When they get here, they trigger off another impulse in the next neuron, in this case the relay neuron, and that'll do the same thing. So you need to learn the word synapse, neurotransmitter, diffuse, and then start off another impulse. This is how you get across the impulse, or you trigger off another impulse and get the signal to continue on. And I think that's all you need to learn about neurons.